Welcome to Open EDU. This is actually a special class on sustainable organizing for sustainable movements. Our instructor today is the wonderful Candace Fortin. She is a longtime organizer who is based in Brooklyn. We've had the pleasure of collaborating with her before on many different things. I am going to let her take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Really exciting to see so many folks from around the world who have shown up for this. I'm very humbled by that. My name is Candace Fortin, once again, based in Bedside, Brooklyn, or Lenape land. And I'm originally from Pensacola, Florida, born and raised. I saw some folks from Florida in the chat, so hopefully some of the stories that we talk about today will resonate with you. But today, we are going to talk about sustainable organizing for sustainable movements. In the internet age, we have access to all of the information we need on what is happening in the world, but what do we do about it? In this session, we will learn accessible models and roles for anyone to step into that create a sustainable organizing ecosystem so we can build power to fight for issues and causes that we believe in. I do want to preface this by saying, first and foremost, in the ways that I'm stepping into this, I do not see myself as a leader. I do not believe in one leader. I do not believe in one activist. I actually reject the term activist. I consider myself an organizer. My job is to continue to build power, to identify other people who can take leadership in their own work, to provide an ecosystem. I don't believe that there's one mic. I don't believe that there's one ideology. I am not dogmatic about any of the theories that I'm going to be sharing today. A lot of the work that I do as far as organizing is through storytelling. So there will be some sharing of stories to kind of demonstrate the models that I've learned. And I'm also a kinesthetic learner. So that's really the best way that I'm able to share the ways that I've learned about this work. But I don't know everything. I make mistakes, but I do want to make sure that folks know that I'm not here to give any sort of dogmas or any sort of strong theories. It's really just to share my experiences, models that work for me, movements that have happened way before I was involved in the work that have informed what I do today and will continue to inform what I do. So first and foremost, let's start with my story, my origin story. And when I say that, I don't mean a villain story, even though I might have been a villain to a certain entity at the time. This is me at 16 years old in Pensacola, Florida. For folks who don't know about Pensacola, Florida, it's been called the Redneck Riviera. It's a 93% white community and 7% Black. The Black residents obviously live in a very lower income area, which is where I grew up. Very violent as far as a lot of the fundamentalist ideologies. It was a very difficult place to kind of navigate and find my own space for a very long time. So this picture here started when I was in biology class. And we were starting to do tests of the water and the ocean. I lived on the Gulf Coast, near the Gulf Coast. And we were doing tests and we started to see a lot of pollution. And it was coming from the offshore drilling that was happening by the BP oil company. I asked the teacher what was happening with that. She did say that this is happening, that there is offshore drilling that is happening, but that there was nothing else that we could do about it. And that was really upsetting to me. So I decided to hold my own press conference. My mother was friends with someone who was a journalist at our only local newspaper called the Pensacola News Journal. I gave her a call and asked if she could come and record me making a statement about how bad the BP oil spill was. I tried to organize my friends. They weren't really excited about coming on a Saturday morning, but I did get a couple of teachers who were really excited to have a very engaged student, so they stood behind me while I made this speech. The speech was about 2 minutes tops. I didn't really have a lot of background information. I wasn't a scientist. I was 16 years old and just learning biology, but I knew it was wrong. And I could see it by the tests that we were doing in our biology class. So I made this speech, and it wound up being the very first oppositional piece against the BP oil company in this town of Pensacola, Florida. Now, we all tragically know what happened after that. The BP oil spill did happen to disastrous effects. Thousands of wildlife were killed. Our industries were ruined. It was uninhabitable to live. The drinking water was poisoned. But at least I said something. And that was a really great seed for me. And it's something that stuck with me many years later when I actually got into this work. So let me fast forward about 10 years, more than that, actually, 15 years after that. I was at the time working as an event producer in New York, doing events for like music production and art and things like that. And I got an email about Bernie Sanders, who was holding a town hall in Times Square. And all I had to do was donate $20. And I was like, you know what? Let me go, because he was starting to say some things that sounded really interesting to me, things that I didn't realize I was angry about, but I probably actually was. And I showed up, and this biggest ask at the end of his speech was, I need everyone here to volunteer. I need you to go on berniesanders.com, look up your zip code, and find activities in your area that you can participate in. So that's exactly what I did when I went home. I found a petition signature gathering event. It was in December. I met up with this old punk rocker who had never voted before, but he was organizing it. And we started to just get signatures to put him on the ballot. I was really excited about that experience. And I started to think about, what can I do to help that I actually am good at? And I'm good at doing events. So I hosted a concert with about 15 bands. I convinced them all to play for free. We had about a room of about 400 people who showed up. We raised thousands and thousands of dollars. And I was like, huh, this is great. This is a really great way to engage people. And it was something that I was good at doing. And there were people from the campaign who were there. And as I was having a conversation with them, I asked, so you got people engaged, we got people excited. How do you get people to vote? They shared with me that they had a bus trip that was going to New Hampshire where we were going to knock doors. And I was fascinated by this. So I took the bus. This was in February of 2016 to New Hampshire to knock doors. I knew nothing about it, but it was pretty easy to do. I already knew about his policies. I knew about the platform. All I had to do was just mark off the people that I spoke to, and was just talking to neighbors, talking to people in the community. The person who was canvassing with me was on crutches, and I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. So I did that experience. I started to get more and more creative about how I was talking to people. I would go to the malls in New Hampshire because I knew there were a lot of young people there who had lunch breaks, and convincing them to vote on their lunch break. If people were elders or didn't have cars or transportation access, we started to organize car trips and carpools to get people to the polls. And we won by a pretty large margin that year, and it was a really great feeling. From then on, I continued to fundraise specifically to volunteer in states to support the Bernie Sanders campaign. I volunteered in 7 states, leading a group of volunteers, sometimes people who would travel with me, sometimes people who would meet me in different cities. And it was a really great and empowering thing. I was able to use the resources and experience that I had to fundraise, and also using that same experience to recruit people, to get people involved. I didn't want to stop. So I wound up doing a lot right after that. I was working on marijuana legalization in California, fighting Warren Buffett, who was trying to ban solar energy in Nevada. Went to New York and went back to New York and started working on local campaigns, working on pro-choice activism, anything that I could do. And it's become a life choice. When people ask me what I do, it's a really complicated thing for me to say because I feel like this is my life's work. Sometimes it exists in a career, sometimes it exists voluntarily, but that's my story and that's the origins of it. So let's talk for a moment about the movement that we are in right now. And I ask this as a question because it still deserves a lot of exploration. Um, the uprisings that happened in the wake of George Floyd's murder were incredible. They were eruptive. And I think the biggest thing that became confusing for folks is that they started to tie it to George Floyd only, whenever we know that this is a systemic issue that exists in every single city in the United States of America and internationally, as far as the police state and the impact and damage and harm that they impose on communities. So we have this one piece of this movement that is incredibly inspirational, that really had people change legislation. Like we have Yes on 2 that is happening in Minneapolis. We have all these other ballot measures and ways that people are talking about defunding the police with the city council. And I think that we encountered something that was needed. It was justified. But at the same time, we did encounter something else. There was a social media response that I felt, in my opinion, was coming from avoiding accountability. They saw us coming for them. They saw us holding people accountable, and they didn't want to have that. So instead, they created something that existed on social media that was a very commercialized and kind of whitewashed response to everything. So it was buy from a Black-owned business, or the Black squares that you saw, or these like curated Instagram post statements, or anything like that. But there was very few posts that really talked about self-accountability, especially with white folks. There were things that started to get missed. So folks started to, donate to that Black-owned business or that Black organization, or, buy a cocktail at this Black-owned bar. But is that really sustainable? Is that really getting to the critical work? Is that really getting to the praxis that needs to happen to have real change? So a movement that could be more sustained and could be still flourishing and going today got really watered down by this social media response that was basically a way to avoid accountability and just keep going on. I don't think a lot of people feel satisfied after this movement, and it's something that I want to explore. So let's talk about this quote. I know that folks have seen it probably in the advertisements for this course, that we must push back against the current culture of microwavable activism on social media. A like, a share, a quick donation will not get us free. And I know that some folks were saying amen, and some folks were saying, you know what, that feels really, really ableist. And I want to go ahead and address that before we continue with the class, because I respect people's critiques and feedback, because that's part of the work that we need to do and continue to do. So first and foremost, as someone who also is differently abled, who may not present that way, I do understand that social media is great as far as amplification, awareness, and yes, getting donations as well. But there's so many other ways to be involved in the work, including if you are disabled in a digital capacity and in a virtual capacity. There's research, there's policy research, there's data processes that are really necessary and critical to movements. There's phone banking, there's texting, there's a ton of different things. There's strategy meetings. There's a lot of ways that folks can be involved that are not on social media and can still respect your ability and your capacity. So I want to say that, and to address it and name it. And I'm definitely open to questions afterwards if there's more clarifying points, things that you feel I got wrong in this interpretation. But I do want to share also, as someone who's differently abled and knows that they can't go to confrontational protests because of that, there's limits that I have as well. I don't go to confrontational protests because I can't be harmed like that. I don't have the mental capacity to deal with that harm. So there's a lot of things that, I think that ways that people can really get into this work that respects their abilities. And I do believe that we have to get out of this culture of social media activism only if we really want to get somewhere that's tangible and sustainable. So let's center ourselves in our thought process and our intentions today before we start to talk about the frameworks. I want folks to take a minute, and you can close your eyes if you want to, or you may already know what this answer is. But what has radicalized you? What is one piece of legislation that would positively change your life if it happened tomorrow? For me, I'll share an example. One thing that really radicalized me around houseless advocacy is growing up temporarily homeless throughout my childhood. And also, when my aunt died in a shelter in New York City in 2002, we did not find out until 14 years later in 2016 because they forgot how to spell her name and they didn't have her proper identification because she was undocumented. That sort of neglect and dismissal of a life because they were undocumented and because they were houseless was something that has radicalized me to this day. There's tons of other stories I can share, and I'm sure you guys have dozens of other stories that you can think of that you can share where you've had some sort of harm, you had these things happen to you, and what has radicalized you? What probably brought you to this space? What brought you to Slow Factory? What made you want to learn here? So keep that with you as we go through these systems. So we're going to talk about the ecology of the movement and what is your role. So I love this gift, by the way, or this flyer. Stop trying to change the world and change the person next to you. I think oftentimes that we see this work as something that's overarching, or there's going to be some big win or some big success, and it really doesn't happen that way. We have to start getting into the practice of what does this look like in my day-to-day life? What is easy for me? What works for me? What makes sense? So we're going to talk about these systems. This is a framework that was provided by Deepa Iyer that I really, really like, and I think it's very, very spot on. So here are the roles that Deepa Iyer has proposed as ways to get involved in the movement. There's the weavers, there's the experimenters, there's the frontline responders, the visionaries, the builders, the caregivers, the disruptors, the healers, the storytellers, and the guides. And all of this is centered around the same common principles of equity, inclusion, liberation, justice, solidarity, resiliency, and interdependency. So let's talk about the weavers. A weaver. I see the through lines of connectivity between people, places, organizations, ideas, and movements. And I want to provide some examples of what that looks like, because oftentimes I've been a weaver, especially when I've worked as a press liaison or helping get together a fundraiser. Weavers can be church organizers, they can be fundraising event hosts, they can be influencers who can leverage their networks for causes. They can be the OG on the block. That might be more of a New York term, but I think that translates other places. But the person who knows everybody, the person who can bring people together, people from different areas of life and make those connections. The person who seems to know everyone and is trusted. Now let's talk about the experimenters. I innovate, pioneer, and invent. I take risks and course correct as needed. Here's some examples of experimenters that I've seen. I think Anonymous is one of them. People know about Anonymous and how he's used YouTube to really terrorize people and finding different ways to address misinformation and taking doxing and flipping it in terms of the powers that be. Direct action organizers. Direct action organizers constantly have these kind of strategic meetings where they're talking about maybe we should try this, or maybe we should drop a banner, or maybe we should surprise the senator at his office. There's a lot of different things that they do that are really experimentation. And artists definitely can support movements as far as like messaging, bringing people together around a certain sort of message. There's a lot that artists can contribute as far as that work. Now let's talk about frontline responders. I innovate, pioneer, and invent. That's the wrong thing, but yes, frontline responders. Frontline responders, they do mutual aid as one of the examples, as well as violence intervention groups. Frontline responders are the people who really show up on the front line. The minute that they hear about a crisis, the minute that there's a direct action being planned, you can count on them to be there. I would say it's Aries energy if anyone's into signs. Like, let me get up there, let me show up, let me be on the front lines, and I'm willing to put my body on the line and be at risk for this cause and to help people and provide care. The visionaries. I imagine and generate our boldest possibilities, hopes, and dreams, and remind us of our direction. I'm giving two contrary examples, but also at the same time. One is Malcolm X and the other is Martin Luther King. To me, they are the visionaries in their own respects. A lot of it was taking the time to think about theory, praxis, to write these speeches that inspire people. These people's thoughts, processes, and the boldness and the strength and the clarity of their visions are what brought millions of people to listen to them, or what got people organized, or what got people connected. You know, there's a reason why people go to hear people speak. There's a reason why people go to these rallies and they need a speaker, they need someone to center the work. These are the visionaries. These are the people who can use their words and use their imaginations to really create something that other people can find inspiring and tangible and being able to do it. The builders. The builders, I organize, develop, and implement ideas, practices, people, and resources in service of collective vision. My examples of builders are organizers. When I talk about organizers, I think about maybe people like myself. When I work on a race and I'm building, I start to make phone calls, right? I start to call for volunteers. I start to host text events where people are sending out text messages to let people know about this candidate or let people know about this issue, and trying to build more power and trying to get more people involved and more people to volunteer. One of my favorite examples is Bayard Rustin, who was definitely a great figure during Martin Luther King's movement, as far as like helping to build these direct actions, helping to build these marches. He was the one who would convince the church owners to house people to like put together food packages, or convincing Black-owned restaurants to feed folks as they were traveling to Washington, convincing bus drivers to take a day off so they could drive people to the marches. That was him. That was his work. You know, he doesn't get a lot of credit because that wasn't what he was looking for, but folks like him are the ones who are able to build the capacity, get people involved, and just action, action, action. Let's talk about the caregivers. I nourish the people around me by creating and sustaining a community of care, joy, and connection. Mutual aid is a great example of this. I would also say church cookouts, just using references that I learned growing up, as well as like direct action medics. These are the people who are committed to care. They want to help. They want to make people feel safe. They want to help people feel reinforced so they can go back into the work. These people are extremely important. I can't stress enough how important it is to have self-care, to have a healing praxis, to have something. If you don't have that, you will burn out. You have to have these people in your place. You have to have people in this life who can really help to center you, make you feel cared for, and help you replenish so you can get back into the work. Now let's talk about the disruptors. I love the disruptors. They're my favorite. I take uncomfortable and risky actions to shake up the status quo, to raise awareness, and to build power. Direct action protesters. I would say punk artists. That's kind of how punk was originated. Hip hop artists is how it was originated, as far as like language and thought and messaging and things that would have legislators talking about having them banned. Antifa is a great example of this. They come in to disrupt. They are not interested in a peaceful protest. They are not interested in comfort. They want to make you scared. They want to make you aware. They want to make you uncomfortable. And these people are extremely necessary. These are very brave people. These are people who know their physical capacity and know that they can, as you see here, throw these chairs and get involved and run away, and they are okay with that. These people do trainings, you know, like the Black Panthers training people with, you know, martial arts and things like that. These people are ready for that work. Let's talk about the healers. I recognize and tend to the generational and current traumas caused by oppressive systems, institutions, policies, and practices. Example of healers: meditation guides, preachers, elders, therapists, I love talking to my therapist every week. It's really, really helpful. Like I really sometimes just talk about the work and what I'm going through or like navigating burnout. It's really, really important. I've had healers reach out to me at various points in my work where they knew I was being stressed out and just guiding me through a meditation. I've seen preachers do this work. And providing spaces, especially in like the death of someone at the hands of the police, like providing those words and that guidance that people need. Elders, I have always, especially movement elders, I have found them to be very grounding, and they're so tried and true in the work that they do that they're able to kind of offer you an anchor and structure so that you can keep going. The storytellers. I craft and share our community stories, cultures, experiences, histories, and possibilities through art, music, media, and movement. Some examples of storytellers: hip hop artists, again, that's pretty much the foundation of hip hop. Filmmakers, speechwriters. Speechwriters can be really, really helpful in this sort of work, helping you frame the narrative, helping you figure out like where you are in the state of things, and being able to provide the right words and messaging to really motivate people. These people are very important. There's often times that I get lost for words and I'm like, can someone just help me write this copy? I need those people. So these people are very, very needed. The guides. I teach, counsel, and advise using my gifts of well-earned discernment and wisdom. Again, I would point to movement elders. I often look to them whenever I'm having an issue because they've probably encountered those issues before. Consultants can be good for this if you're on a campaign. Political authors, like oftentimes I will sit down and read a book if I just need to cleanse and get recentered. It really, really helps me understand the praxis and how this has existed in other spaces. Other people's perspectives on it can sometimes help me. Reading history books and getting deeper and deeper into the historical patterns really helps ground me so I don't panic every single time that it happens. Academics can be really great as far as like framing the moment, understanding the histories, and being able to lend you that sort of guidance as well. These folks are very necessary. And really helping to shape your thought process and intellect around the work. Let's talk about capacity building. The first shot is from the Black Panther movement, which I look to today as just an incredibly admirable. The Black Panther Party was really wonderful at capacity building. They were really wonderful at keeping everyone grounded in a theory of change. They were really wonderful at building leadership and providing services that really pretty much covered everything that the Black community needed at the time. I also want to look at movements like Standing Rock and the way that they were able to capacity build, motivating people to drive to Standing Rock, to hold it down there, to stay there for months. That is a recruitment and retention model that I definitely admire. So let's talk about what this looks like and tools that I have definitely used or have seen in the past that I think are really important. Because first you have that build, you have those roles, but what does it look like to really recruit and retain these people? First and foremost, give tools, training, and access to build leadership with the most impacted communities. I cannot stress enough how foundational and important that is to start. You have to center the leadership of the most impacted communities or the movement will fail. You cannot speak for other people who are impacted. You have no business doing that, but what you can do is provide the tools to those folks so that they're able to lead those movements. That's when we scare the people in power. That is when those things happen. I do not believe in the term voice for the voiceless. It's about giving those powers to other people. It's about giving them to the folks who really need to learn how to advocate for themselves. Meeting people where they are. So whenever we talk about like reaching out to, the most impacted groups, I can give an example of this. That was a learning curve for me. I was working on Proposition Triple H in Los Angeles, which was a ballot measure to provide housing for the homeless or houseless. And we first thought that we would somehow be successful just showing up at Skid Row and talking about policy. That did not work. We learned that very, very quickly. These folks are extremely vulnerable. These folks have too many things to worry about. And it's not fair, and it's very violent to step into the space like that. And we got checked very quickly. So we decided to make a pivot, and we pivoted to providing a resource fair in that same area. The resource fair provided haircuts, IDs, pet food. I think we did eyebrow waxing, cell phones, anything that they needed to provide a bit of comfort and relief. When we had that resource fair, I decided to start to sit down with folks like while we were eating and just start to hear their stories. Just listening. Some people I would talk to for close to an hour, hearing their stories, hearing about what happened to them. And then we would get into, well, is there something that you would like to do about it? By the end of this, and this is also part of a collaboration of a lot of different organizing groups, we had these same people who first said fuck off to us in Skid Row, who eventually used our resources and wanted to share their stories, to actually phone banking from the shelters for this ballot measure, to having marches for this ballot measure, to canvassing for this ballot measure. That sort of power is what got that ballot measure passed. We also made sure that they were aware that they were able to vote, that they had that ability to do that. And so that was a pivot, and meeting people where they are. And it was a very valuable lesson. I'm glad that they taught it to us. Let's talk about one-on-ones. One-on-ones is kind of like the story that I just shared about going to the shelters and listening to people's stories. One-on-ones are a really great entry point to bring new people who are interested in the work to the work. So what that can look like is just asking them, hey, tell me about your background. Tell me about your story. What makes you want to be part of this work? Let's go back to the question of what has radicalized you. And then you share your story. You might have shared it a billion times, but being able to share that as well, so you have this kind of common ground. And then you start to ask, well, what are you interested in doing? What would you like to do? What are you good at? What is your schedule like? What sort of challenges that you might have as far as like, being lower income and having to work a lot, or, having kids and having to manage that schedule. There's a lot of different things, but being able to kind of understand the person's capacity, what they're interested in, how they want to grow. And then that's a really great and honest and rooted starting point to build a relationship so you can continue the work. Strong data and tracking processes. And I don't want that to sound a little too distant, because I know data might sound like a weird thing. Sometimes data can be just a spreadsheet that you keep really good track of. Let's say that you are doing mutual aid and you have all these people who are like emailing and signing up, just capturing all that information. When can they come in this day? When can they come in that day? Who's like the most consistent? Who shows up all the time? What can this person do? Who hasn't shown up a lot? Maybe I can follow up with them. Being able to kind of track that and being able to see who these folks are really, really important. There's, of course, a ton of really intricate ways that you can use data outside of that, but it really could be something as simple as a spreadsheet and just tracking activity as you're going along with each action that you choose to do. Regular meetings. Regular meetings are super duper important as you're building around an issue. Having check-ins. I know whenever we're doing a direct action, for instance, those check-ins can be daily. They might be twice a day, just like staying in touch with each other, seeing what's going on. If it's a long-standing issue that you're working on, having monthly meetings just to keep people updated, get new ideas, talk about other ways that you can be involved is a great way to keep people connected. I'm a big believer in this as well. Recreational and educational community events. I believe that every movement needs to have recreational pieces to their organizing, whether that's a cookout, whether that's like a dance party just to shake something off, whether that's a healing circle where people are finally able to like unpack something. I've seen union groups, start to have book clubs so people can start to get deeper into the work and the history so that they can stay motivated. It is absolutely essential that you create these spaces for people, because that's the way that you build community. They will come back if they feel like they have a community. Staying rooted in shared values and the theory of change. Theory of change is essentially your strategy. There's the short term, there's also the long term. But the theory of change is, here is our goal. There's the goal, like rooted in the values and the issues that we want to achieve. And this is what we need to do as far as strategy to make that goal happen. So always staying rooted in that, Shared values will always keep you grounded. That will help you call people in. That will help you understand when you're starting to go awry. And the theory of change can also always change, right? But it's still a great starting point to have a shared purpose, a shared goal, so everyone's on the same page and moving together. So now I'm going to share this case study. This is the Dream 7. This was one of the first direct actions that I ever worked on. I was doing a lot around electoral work. This photo is of Belen Sisa, who is one of the part of the Dream 7. She's also a DACA recipient. That is from the jail that she was jailed in. The Dream 7 were a group of undocumented DACA recipients fighting against Trump's order to end DACA in 6 months. They obviously felt that their lives were on the line. There were no legal protections for them, and they had to do something extreme. I want to counter this by saying that there were a lot of protests happening at this time in DC, but they decided to focus on an extreme action and a singular narrative to really, really bring attention and focus to this issue and how serious it is. So I was recruited by, I would say, a weaver. I was called, and this is about 2 months after my father had passed. I was called first to ask, being asked if I wanted to help with press support. I said no. And about a week later, they called again. I said, I'll think about it. I was still grieving. I was still going through a lot. But one of the biggest narratives in my head at the time was also about my father's own immigration and how it might have impacted his mental health before he passed away. And as that narrative started to keep going through my head, the third time they called, they said, okay, can you just come to DC for 3 days? Fine. We have a housing, we have a setup for you. They were very persistent, so I said, yes, I will go. Essentially what they needed was an English-speaking press person to represent these folks. So I went to the movement house, and there was a ton of energy that was going on. There were people doing all kinds of things. There were strategists, the weaver who brought me in, was making sure, he basically helped recruit a lot of the people. There were people just really entering in different points of entry. And we were supporting essentially the Disruptors, which are the Dream 7. The Dream 7 basically made a commitment to get intentionally arrested outside of Chuck Schumer's office, being held in jail without giving their names. So they were all going by Jane Doe or John Doe, and basically going on hunger strike until they were released from the jail. This hunger strike went on for 8 days, and they stayed in jail for those 8 days. This was us training them. That's me before the blonde braids that you see today. That was us training these disruptors on talking points. So we trained them on things to say, what to say, because obviously whenever they're starting to get arrested, there's going to be a lot of nerves and a lot of stuff, and there's going to be press. We wanted to make sure that they were very clear on the talking points beforehand, before they went into the jail, because after that, there would be a separation of communication between all of us. So we had folks prepped. That was the Spanish-speaking liaison here, and I was there as the English-speaking liaison. And this is where social media actually did play a big role, as well as press. We were able to get a lot of English-speaking media, especially through Democracy Now! And Vice News, NBC News, some daytime talk shows, to talk about the sacrifices that these folks were making. People started to make memes, kind of immortalizing these people, and became a thing. And we were actually very surprised by the amount of response that was happening. So what you see here, this group picture in the courthouse, we were going to the court hearings every day, where essentially each of the Dream 7 would make a decision to still not give their names and would still go back into jail, as opposed to giving their names and being released. It went from maybe about 10 to 15 of us going to that jail to about 200 people showing up, and it happened because of that press and because of that social media, people coming in to really support. So these are people who I would say in various capacities might have been serving as caregivers, as moral support. We needed it, and they needed to know that they were being supported. So this is the only way that they were able to visually see what the support was before they went back into a jail cell. So that was extremely important to have that built in. And this video is coming up, but this is when they were released. And this is after a 8-day, 24/7 vigil outside of this jail. We provided a lot of moral support. We did chants. We had, just kind of a full rotation of people coming in, and even providing that care and that acceptance and just giving people hugs when they were coming out. It was really, really important to provide that sort of space, to provide that sort of mental health support. And I also want to name one of the biggest things that I will always remember from this action. There was a family, a Mexican family that was undocumented, that was based in St. Louis, who saw this story on the news. They drove all the way from St. Louis to DC to cook authentic Mexican food for these people. I still get choked up when I think about it. So they provided this food. They fixed meals for these folks. So the minute that they came out of the jail, they were able to be sustained. They were able to be fed. They were able to be cared for. They were able to be heard. They were able to feel safe. And it gave them the strength for literally the next day to stand outside of the steps in DC and continue to advocate for themselves. They didn't speak any English. They didn't say a word. They would just wake up at 5 in the morning and start fixing food for everyone. And it was like one of the best gestures and ways of showing up that I've ever seen. All right, let me pause that. All right, so this is them. Again, this is them post-jail, feeling good, feeling supported, feeling strong. A lot of that came from the work of caregivers. A lot of that came from the work of healers who were showing up for them. And I also want to provide this as well, as far as like where we ended this action, but what happened after that and how we stayed rooted. We ended with chants. We always had chants and songs with everything that we did. It was a way for us to stay connected, to stay energized, to realize why we're there, that, the culture is still strong, that there's ways that we can still stay connected and stay elevated. This is the way that we ended that action, not knowing what would happen with DACA. But I will say this, the community building that happened out of that work has still continued to this day. I consider these people my brothers and sisters. If people are undocumented and looking for work, if people are undocumented and having issues with licenses, if people are having issues with anything that's tied to their immediate safety because they are undocumented, we still have this network of support and community, and they still continue to fight. Some of them have taken steps to do this work on the legislative side. Some people have taken steps to do this work on the advocacy side with nonprofits. And it's still a network, and we still support each other, and we still continue to build. So this was one of the best first shots I had at working on a direct action, and I value that experience to this day. So let's recap and start to talk about best practices that you can take with you. Again, always center and allow the most marginalized to lead. Take periodic intake of capacity. Learn when to step back and when to step in more. When I say that, that's whenever people get in danger, right? Like there's a person who always wants to talk, always wants to say something, always wants to make sure that everyone has an equal say and equal participation in the work that is happening. Everyone is a leader in their own right. Respect everyone's individual capacity, okay? So like, for instance, I help with mutual aid every Saturday. I am able to drive my car for 2 hours on Saturday to drop off mutual aid. That's what I can do. And you can count on me for that. So, and that's okay. That's just my capacity based on my schedule. But we should really respect that. Like, not everyone has the same resources. Not everyone has the same time. Not everyone has the same access. But whatever way they want to step into the work, honor that and respect it, and they will stay. Take breaks when needed. The work is always there. I don't know how to stress that enough. Like, don't have enough of an ego thinking that it all falls on you. It never does. That's not good organizing practice. That's not a good mindset. You should be able to take breaks and allow more people to come into the work. Celebrate the small wins. It's extremely important. You can get very, very locked into what's wrong and what's wrong and what's wrong with the world. celebrate the small wins. If you hit a milestone with, let's say, organizing 10 volunteers that day and they all showed up, that's a win. If you had a successful shift and really great responses from voters, that's a win. Everything is important. If you finish a shift, that's a win. Just like always make sure that you are providing spaces for that positive reinforcement and shouting people out and recognizing what they're doing so they feel worthy and motivated and want to keep doing the work. When in doubt, and this is something that I do all the time, read up on historical movements for inspiration because nothing is new. Okay? We know mutual aid is not new. So you can definitely learn from that. And there's a lot of, especially like direct action ideas and things like that. Like I've learned so much and come up with so many different ideas just based on historical movements and what folks have done in the past. What we did in the Dream 7, real talk, I actually kind of had that inspiration about the importance of what that would be from Paul Revere's story. Paul Revere was a singular figure who represented, whether he's mythological or not, represented something else. So like zeroing in on a very specific story to highlight a bigger problem is something that really informed what we did with the Dream 7. Leave space for recreational activity building and community building and joy. Extremely important. Extremely important. Please do not start these movements, these groups, without providing space for that. There has to be space for joy. There has to be space for community. Further reading, and I'm trying to give a variety here so that folks maybe find something that appeals to them. I am a big fan of the way that Antifa has organized, especially in Europe. A lot of the praxis and a lot of the sustainability of that movement and the way that it's been able to build and come to the United States is a great study. Whether you agree or not with their theories or their point of view, the way that they've been able to sustain and also work to put people into government who can fight against the fascists, especially in Europe, is a really, really great case study. There's a lot to learn there. We Do This Till We Free Us by Mariama Kaba. I've read this book, and what I really, really like about it is the emphasis on community care and also the constant encouragement that we use our own imaginations to see what abolition looks like, to see what community care looks like. It's a really great book, and it really prods you to think about these movements and how it can actually look on your own end. She doesn't have all the answers, and she never presents herself that way. Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis by Dean Spade. It's a really great way to see the architecture of mutual aid, what that looks like. It is a lot of work. But yeah, again, I think it's also the analysis that, yes, it's happening now, but let's not make it a trendy thing. Let's see the DNA of this and see how we can make it sustainable, because there's still tons of people who need to be fed, still tons of people who need resources. And this is something that should not just be a trend, but should be a sustainable model. Say Their Names, How Black Lives Matter Came to Matter in America. This is a new book, but it's also talking about the moment of the uprisings and really trying to unpack it and tying it to previous movements. It's a really great way to kind of provide context and texture to the ways that we look at this work, and I think it provides a more sustainable model. So that's what I have. And so you have questions, you want to contact me. I'm not a huge fan of DMs, but I put my email there too. So that's my Gmail. If you ever want a one-on-one, I actually love one-on-ones. I don't care where you're coming from. Like, I know everyone, especially folks from the global perspective, probably have issues that maybe don't stand so much in like the space of democracy, but I'd love to hear from you. I definitely have worked with folks as far as advising on just like ways of building culture and community to advocate for various things. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions, if you just want to have a one-on-one. I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Candace. I'm like wiping away the tears from this storytelling about the family who drove to bring fresh homemade food. I just can't even think of a more beautiful gesture. Whew. Thank you for sharing that story. That I'm going to think about that for a really long time. And I also think in movement spaces, you know, some of the things that have moved me the most are those kind of offerings from the heart, like food, like music, and like, you know, embodied practices for rejuvenation. So you have shared an incredible wealth of information about different ways to both find one's place in the movement, um, and also for how to sustain and nourish both oneself and also the movement at large. And I think a lot of people in the class will be reflecting on these offerings for a long time. One kind of burning question that I have for you is, you know, you early on in the presentation, you had a slide that was like something about don't change the world, change your neighbor, radicalize your neighbor. Like that's your job, right? So, you know, I think people around the world might relate to this. You know, but here in Planet Brooklyn, I often come across people in my own social circle who are really cynical about the whole endeavor to build electoral power. They do not feel like voting matters. They feel like both the Democrats and the Republicans are the same. It's politics. Everyone is corrupt. There's no difference between Biden and Trump. So in that vein of like, how do you radicalize or engage your neighbor? You know, what is the thing that you say to people who are, I think, just deeply entrenched in this kind of cynicism about electoral politics? I need help. I need a talking point.
Well, and this is a Southern phrase, but let me keep it a buck with y'all. First of all, I worked my ass off on mobilizing Black voters in the Midwest for Biden. And my intentions and work with that was just to eliminate Trump. I had no faith as someone of Haitian descent, and knowing about his history, that he was going to show up for us in the way that I needed. I had no faith in that. But I knew that Trump was worse. That's all I had. You know, and it's just like thinking around like reproductive rights specifically. That's all I had. And the only thing that we constantly said, and I'm not, you know, I think a lot of people think that some of this work happens in a way that's naive, but it's not. It's just that he's a more movable target, maybe, that we're able to push him a bit more. And even if it's not because he cares, it's because he wants to keep his image, he wants to be reelected, they want to keep the optics going, et cetera. I think it's still important to participate in that way. It's a very simple thing to do if you don't want to help organize. But there's also, and if people feel really dispirited, and I keep saying this, it's think about what's happening locally, because that stuff can be actually more inspiring, more tangible, and you can really get the wiggle room to get these real radicals into the space. You know, I know, Jungwon, you know about my work supporting with Chiose, who is, you know, a socialist with Warriors in the Garden, and the youngest incoming city councilman in the history of New York. That wouldn't happen on a national scale, but here he is in the city council, and city council is a huge role in New York. And that also plants the seeds to start to erode that kind of nepotism and, just like piggybacking things and, people getting paid to hire certain folks. And, we have to start to erode that from the bottom up. I found a lot of power working on district attorneys races. I think one great example I can share is I worked on a race in Natchez, Mississippi for against a DA who's been in office for about 25 years and incarcerated 5,000 people. And we brought in a young Black woman who's never really run before, but it was an extremely segregated town of Natchez, Mississippi. And I was looking at the numbers and I was like, wait, there's 8,000 Black people and 6,000 white people. Why is it like this way? And it was just about mobilizing them. So we did that and we won. And it was a huge deal in Natchez, Mississippi. It completely rocked this community of 14,000 people. there were a lot of threats and violence and things that happened after that. But like what the rest of Mississippi sees is that it's possible. And what that does, it creates a kind of microcosm where everyone's like, well, what did they do? Like, how do we do that? And I think that there's a lot of ways to get involved locally. I think there are. I think, the DAs are a great focus. I think the city council is a really great focus. If you can vote for a sheriff, that's strong. That's strong. That's a really, really cool thing to do. I think there's definitely different ways, but I'm not saying, I understand some people just don't want to vote and they never will. And I encounter thousands of people like that every single time I do an election. But I will say I would encourage you to exercise it in some capacity. There is a lot of change that can happen, especially on the local level. If you feel really defeated by the big picture Biden stuff, which I completely understand, you really need to start focusing on local. There's a lot of really incredible work that is happening. We can also look at India Walton in Buffalo, who's a Black single mother socialist who's running right now, and she's pretty much on track to win. I think that there's ways to get involved that are going to make you feel empowered, and you're going to see the work and the change happen immediately. Also, I think a lot do not put accountability into factor in accountability whenever they talk about elections. It's like Biden won, and that's it. You're allowed to critique him.
Right.
You have to worship him. You have to do that. I don't think that's really wise. I think that a lot of people need to start thinking about what accountability looks like right afterwards.
Right.
We have used some of that DNA with races with the DA, where they say they're going to do this, and this. We give them a 3-month plan, and if they don't do it, then
show up on their doorstep. Yes, show up.
Yeah, so I think, and we can also start to instill that a bit. I think there's also room for more nuance when we talk about candidates. Like, this person's really great for this person's really great for this, but no one's perfect, no one's wonderful. People lie all the time. This is the reality. So let's see what it looks like to also have that accountability piece starting very early on.
Yeah, I like that. So focusing, maybe bringing the scale down to something more local and providing really concrete examples of how an elected official at the local level can make a decision that could really impact your life. And then also, accountability. Thank you. Thank you, students. Yes, I lost my train of thought. Yes, also accountability. Okay, so I'm going to merge 2 questions from the Q&A. It's basically the same question, which is how to constructively call in white people in positions of power, leadership, and privilege. But there's sort of 2 approaches. How do you do it if you're another white person? How do you do it constructively? And how do you do it if you are a non-white person outside of that sort of power structure? So let's approach it first from maybe, how do you do it if you are a white person within that? There is a white student who asked the question of like how to best and most constructively call in white leadership, white people in positions of power. And then there's also a BIPOC person in the social justice space who's asking the same question.
Okay, cool. So when you, and just to repeat back, leadership as in legislative leadership or corporate leadership?
I think they're talking about leadership in the movement space, in the sort of NGO, nonprofit, even the nonprofit space. It's like it's sort of people who are supposedly working for the same goals, right?
Okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to be completely helpful here because there's I don't necessarily believe in kindly calling in whiteness. So let's start there.
Doesn't have to be kind, but constructive so that we get results. Yeah.
Okay. I would say, well, I'm trying to say this in a constructive way. I don't personally think if it's a BIPOC-centered issue or something that radically really impacts your community, like let's say is BIPOC folks, undocumented folks, trans folks, there's no place for leadership with white people. That's how I feel. So, I mean, when we talk about navigating around that, I feel like it's you're creating this pyramid that's it's like a pyramid scheme. It's like a racial pyramid scheme, and you're going into the same trap. Um, again, to go back to, like, let's say the Black Panthers or even Standing Rock, where they would check you. They would check you if you came out of pocket, if you're a white person doing this, that, and the third. Um, Black Panthers just didn't allow that. They would have alliances and coalitions, but like there was just no, because they needed to focus on their own thing. I think if you're having that issue, and let's say it's in a job, right? Let's say that you work in a nonprofit, this is your job, and you're not feeling fulfilled, and you came to this work for a different reason. Please create your own space. You're capable of doing that. That would be my solution. Even if it's a small thing, even if it's a community group, even if it's like a happy hour where you're just meeting up with other Black folks or trans folks or whatever, just to start to build community. I do not think it is okay at all for white leadership to exist in radical spaces, because everything that, yeah, I'm probably going to have trouble saying this, but like I do think that I think because everything, all these radical issues that we talk about with liberation, abolition, like reproductive health, everything, they all impact BIPOC people exponentially more. It's, in my opinion, it's completely unacceptable for white leadership to exist in those spaces.
I mean, I agree with you. I think what I have come to see over many, many years is that it's really not possible to retrofit racial equity onto a white-led organization or an organization that was sort of founded and built by white people. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you as well. It's build our own thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do here at Slow Factory with Open EDU. That's why we really center, BIPOC, global majority instructors, because we're trying to kind of sprinkle and seed and cultivate just a new paradigm, which is not always referential to the other thing, right? It's something that is just rooted in a different way of thinking. There's a really interesting question here from Yuhei Ogawa in LA, saying super fascinating that you're a fan of Antifa because of the negative public stigma. And I think we need to kind of address how much sort of how much the media and also kind of mainstream political interests have really actively stigmatized Antifa. Can you speak a little bit about the biggest misconception that people have about the anti-fascist movement?
Yeah, I mean, we're just so afraid, and this is like probably because the U.S. is in a commercialized state, so everything has to be digestible, everything has to be palatable, and everything has to be one note. So anti-fascist is not a strong stance. Does anyone want to be a fascist? So I mean, I get confused, like when people, but to your point, and again, what I love about the Antifa book, and I definitely commend the writer for really digging deep into this, because he did it during the time of Trump's first election in 2016. The way that they achieved it in Europe is exponentially different, but also how they've been able to identify those threats. Antifa has existed since World War I. And they recognize fascism head on. They know the whole DNA of fascism. They know that it exists in the government. They have effectively intimidated people who were doing genocide, committing genocide, and have continued to stand up physically. Now, when we get frustrated here in the US, right? Because we always make these demands in the US, and they tend to be a lot different than what Antifa talks about. However, when you think about like the theory of anti-racism, I think they're pretty much on point. They believe in putting their bodies on the line. They don't want their names out there. They don't want to be commended for anything. They don't want recognition. I will share, like when I was getting doxxed around Charlottesville, I get doxxed all the time, but someone connected me to someone from the Antifa group who actually helped me come up with the right technology systems and things like that. No Ego was fully available and has done it for many of my friends who've been doxxed as well. I don't see what's wrong with that. I've never seen a white person step up like that. I've never seen, I don't see a lot of, I'm seeing it more, especially with the uprisings, but there weren't like a lot of white folks who were just willing to like put their bodies on the line and get arrested and do this work. Their theory is also that you cannot match fascism with diplomacy. That it doesn't work because fascism is not diplomatic. Fascism will kill you if you allow it to continue. So for them, it's really about matching it and defending it and not putting any Black people in the line of that. They want to protect Black people. They want to protect Latinx people. They want to protect immigrants. So I would just encourage people to read the book. I mean, it's just worth getting the perspective on the historical context. The media definitely has taken its toll, but be careful about that talking point because Trump uses that a lot. He starts to put Antifa around anything. He calls AOC Antifa. He calls I'm not Antifa, but I have been supported by them, and all of my experiences have made me feel very safe. So I think, the media has definitely oversaturated it. There are some people, some outliers, and they address this in the book as well, who get a little too crazy. They said that there's a part of the book that talks about the skinhead movement, which actually wasn't rooted in racism. It was quite the opposite to begin with. And there was like a group called the Knuckleheads, and they would, those are the ones who just came in to start shit. And this is like a common problem. Again, nothing is new. There's always going to be that person who's just like, I see a bunch of rowdy people and I'm going to pull up and I'm just going to start fighting folks because I'm just angry. We've seen byproducts of this in like Woodstock 99. I've just watched a documentary on this, but about white rage, and people just looking for an outlet. And sometimes they find these other groups where they want to, continue, and they just see people doing that, but they're not really worried about the praxis or the theory. It happens all the time. It happens in Black movements. It happens in immigration movements. It happens in trans movements. But that's what they chose to focus on, as opposed to, Antifa's never stormed the Capitol.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice for the person who asked the question. It's really just about explaining to somebody what are the basic 3 or 4 core tenets of the Antifa movement. And then I love what you said, which is just to say they're anti-fascists. Are you for fascists? I mean, I think that's a wonderful way of kind of flipping the question on its head, reminding people what the core principles are. And then also just to note that with any kind of decentralized organizational structure, you are going to have people, all someone has to do to kind of pretend to be part of that is to, dress up a certain way and then like say that they're that, but that's not they're not necessarily claiming them.
I want to be one more point. I will say in the
Yes.
US, I don't think that we're willing to admit that there are fascist systems here. I think we're terrified of that. We're terrified to admit that, the police state is the fascist state.
We are so deep in
that.
it. We're so deep in it, we can't even see it.
Yeah, we're terrified to admit, but like Trump or ICE or we're terrified to admit that we have government. Fascism is a byproduct of the government, and we're terrified to admit that we're a part of that.
Overt, it's overt, and it's so interesting. I think it's sort of like the frog in a boiling pot syndrome, which a lot of people brought up during the Trump years and even during the Bush years before that, just sort of ratcheting up. Okay, Guantanamo. Okay, people are now being arrested with no sort of real evidence and being put into a black site in Cuba for, or somewhere in, where were some of those other black sites, the secret prisons, years at a time.
The Japanese internment was fascism. It's just like we just lie to ourselves.
Yeah, it's true. It really goes against, I think, our national narrative. I'm conscious of time. I'm hoping you could just stay for a little while longer because there are still so many interesting questions and in the chat, in the Q&A box. One is from someone who actually lives in a small rural city in South America.
Okay.
And, you're talking about all of this amazing sort of organizing and this sort of organizing ecosystem. It's very rich in New York City. It's very rich throughout the South of the United States. It's rich in Washington, D.C., right? So this person is writing from a small rural city in South America where there's virtually no activism or social justice action or movement, but there are a lot of problems, and people really there's an urgent need for more funding for education and social justice movements to kind of get more for the people. Where is a good place to start to kind of spark that flame?
Since you're in a small rural town, and the only thing comparable I have to this is the Mississippi work, but I think the very first thing is starting with one-on-ones. And it can be very casual, doesn't have to be anything else, but just start to talk, like, what are you seeing right now? Getting people to vocalize it, directly to you, and starting to attach it to different systemic issues. Like, what are you seeing? Like, what's stressing you out the most right now? Start to just survey people and start to document it. You can, and if I don't know what the government is like there, I don't know what surveillance is like there, I don't know what that looks like, but whether it's like maybe just starting to call people, just trying to get a consensus, and then I think if you can get 10 people who agree with you that this is a problem, have a meeting. What can we do? It sounds like you want to initiate it, so it sounds like you might be a builder. But what can we do? What can we do? What can we do to mobilize around this? Is it a government ask, or is it maybe creating community care where there's free educational programs? Will the government have an issue with us doing free educational programs? Oftentimes they do. And I think that's a good way. So starting with the one-on-one, just calling people that you know, people that you're familiar with who are going to answer you, having a meeting, and seeing what you guys can do. Like, I think there is definitely a way to resist with free education if you feel like you're not going to have it sustained. I don't know what government you're actually in or under. I don't know if it's a dictatorship where it's not even the point of asking, but maybe see what else that might look like. But yeah, and talk, if it's education, start to talk to parents, start to talk to students, start to, work with them and see like what they need. And if we feel like maybe it's possible to do something that's a community-based project as opposed to asking the government for anything.
Okay, here's an interesting question about financial sustainability.
Okay.
How do we make movements financially sustainable? What are some models that have worked, I guess, for you personally, but also the movements that you've been involved with?
Yeah. Let's stay out of the nonprofit industrial complex. That's a whole other, and I don't even know if you really want to go that far because that gets weird. As far as financial stability, I have seen mutual aid groups really, really flourish as far as obviously being able to crowd fundraise, getting those resources, getting grants. And if you are interested in starting something like that, let me know and I'll connect you to those folks. They'd be happy to share that information. But there's groups who are able to, reimburse if you have like a car issue or something like that, or do this, or there's groups who help like with prison aid for families and like helping with their transportation when they go back and forth. A lot of it does come from fundraising, like crowd fundraising. And so I would say if that's something that you are thinking of or want to start, this is actually where social media could take a really great role. Is like having someone help you build out a platform, creating that narrative, creating that story, and starting to put you out there so that you can start to raise money. Start with crowdfunding because it's also a great indicator of whether the community supports you or not. And that's a really great test. So like trying to get community support, seeing what people think, and then doing that. Once you get established, let's say that you want to start a nonprofit at some point, you can look into grants. There's definitely ways of doing that. As far as personal financial stability, because there's also a thing. Like that was something I struggled with when I first started organizing. I was just like, I don't want to work. I just want to fight all the time. And like, it was not sustainable. And you really have to be honest about the things that you need. you know, I have like a dog and a cat. I can't like not take care of them, you know? So it's, you know, everyone has like their different financial baseline things. So if what it really looks like for you, for your capacity is that you do kind of have to work a part-time job while you're doing your passion projects or building your nonprofit or building your mutual aid group, please do that. Please do that. Like, don't immediately tilt that way without making sure that you're financially okay yourself. And then you're going to be able to start to build those communities where they're able to look out. But I would say definitely just see like, what do I personally need, like to take care of my rent, my food, transportation outside of this work, and what does that look like to earn that, and then move on. And I promise you, it might be frustrating at first to have to do double duty. If you keep working and you keep working, you keep building, you might have a nonprofit where you can pay yourself at some point. It won't happen overnight.
Yeah. Okay, great. I mean, so many of the things that themes that I'm pulling from your talk and your response to the question are, you know, building slowly and methodically, right? And then you get to a place of sustainability, really investing in community through acts of care and through cultivating joy, um, engaging people one-on-one. I've heard you say that several times, engaging people one-on-one. It doesn't feel like a grand gesture. It might not be something you can put on the gram, but if you're talking to people one-on-one and changing somebody's mind about a local issue, that is super significant. And it's hard to even imagine what kind of ripple effects that will have over the course of time. So I think, you know, what I'm hearing from you is a really strong encouragement to have those conversations and really engage with people one-on-one, and to engage with people locally, to remind people of the importance of electoral power through local issues, and also through accountability, and of course to keep reflecting on and learning from what has already been established by the people who came before us, reading books and looking at history and, you know, learning some of those lessons. I think it's true. There's nothing new under the sun, although things take new and innovative forms all the time. Some of those core principles that you're talking about are really constant over time. So I think it's, you know, already 1:20. We're going to get ready to wrap up. There is a question about how to schedule a one-on-one with you. If you could drop your email in the chat, that would be great. And then another question about how someone might be able to compensate you for your time if they are able to do a one-on-one with you, just wanting to make sure that they are able to offer you something for your time. So, you know, if you want to drop, or maybe that's something you could work out with the person if you do have a one-on-one. It sounds like they just want to make sure that they are not taking advantage.
Oh, no. Like one-on-ones I organize, I've never asked someone to pay me for that. No.
Okay, so that, so please drop your email in the chat, and thank you so much for sharing this. I think this is now a time to also talk about community care to our community. Please, if you have learned anything in this class and our other classes, please become a monthly supporter of Open EDU at any level. $100 a month or even a $5 a month contribution is super meaningful. It helps us make these classes free and available to people around the world. It helps us make them accessible with signs of ASL interpreters like Jeremy and Cynthia. And importantly, it also helps our staff you know, do promotion before the event and to recap the events afterward with key learnings, to edit the videos, to put them online, to make our entire library of Open EDU classes from the past 2 years available and accessible and free to the public around the world. This is a core part of the work. This is a foundation of knowledge that we need to dismantle the old paradigm that got us into this mess, and to really seed the new paradigm to take us forward into a much better place, and to draw on the incredible ancestral wisdom of the global majority. So please, please, please become a monthly supporter of the Slow Factory so that we can keep Open EDU free. Thank you so much, Candace. This has been such a wonderful class. You're such a dynamic instructor and storyteller, and I think you've inspired everybody to do something and to find their role, and really appreciate you.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, everyone. Please email me. Let's build.
Okay. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up for this class. Thank you to our interpreters, Jeremy and Cynthia. Thank you to the Slow Factory team, everybody who came together to make this happen. It's always a really huge group effort. And of course, thank you to Candace for all of the years of wisdom, expertise, and strategy that you bring to the table as an organizer. Thank you. Bye, everyone.